the judges of the High Court. Supreme Court in its special sitting now open.
Good morning, all. Again, we have gathered here in this courtroom to have another of these special sittings. They've been happening with a degree of regularity which should give those of us who are able to attend reason for pause, because tomorrow is promised to no one. On behalf of my sisters and the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, to the family of the late Mr. Emery Robertson Sr., sincere condolences are extended. My sister, Justice Lands, has sent remarks on behalf of the bench of the court, and she has asked me to read these remarks to the court. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, King Solomon sets out several events of time in our lives. Among those events, the following is the most relevant to these proceedings. In verses 1 and 2, King Solomon wrote, "There is an appointed time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die." Some commentators remark that there's a time to be born and a time to die, but no time to live. That time, they say, is so short that it is not worth mentioning. As soon as we are born, we begin to die. The scripture also says that the days of our lives are 70, or 80, if strength endures. Thankfully, Mr. Robertson lived beyond 70. Obviously, strength failed him, so he fell short of 80. But he fought a good fight. He finished the course, and he kept faith. I came to know Mr. Robertson in 2007 when I served the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court as master in all of the OCS countries and as High Court judge in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Mr. Robertson appeared before me on several occasions, most times well prepared. There was always something to learn from him. He was always polite, but he was very passionate about his cases and strong in his defense of his clients. His advocacy before the court was legendary. His oratory skills were brilliant. I found Mr. Robertson to be a warm, humble, respectful, caring person. It has been said, and I agree, that he had a way of setting people at ease with his warm and infectious smile when you approached him. It has also been said, and again I agree, that he had a way of disarming you with his courtesy and his politeness. That is not to say that he influenced any of my decision-making process. If he was dissatisfied with any decision I made against his clients, he would appeal to the higher tribunal. Sometimes he lost. As some of the lawyers here might know, my court was not always a serious or somber place. In fact, I recall having some amusing moments in the court. One of those amusing moments occurred in the presence of Mr. Robertson and Mr. Daniel, which I will highlight. One day, a witness came to give evidence in a land dispute matter. He was a Rasta man. As soon as he entered the courtroom, I started smelling something. My head began spinning, my eyes watered and burned, my throat began to itch, my sinuses began to act up. I turned to the witness and asked, "Were you smoking?" His response was, "Yes, cigarette." Mr. Robertson turned to him and said, "Stop telling lies. Cigarette what?" Well, by that time, Mr. Slange reports, I was out of my chair and I started singing. No, I can't sing like Justice Slange. But the lyrics she has here go, "I'm feeling high, so high. Hey Rasta man, hear what I say? We don't want none of your senses." I'm sure my sister Justice Slange would have done a much better job singing. Well, the court was in uproar. I can still hear Mr. Robertson and Mr. Dwayne Daniel laughing heartily. Of course, I had to adjourn the court and I went home to sleep. I was completely knocked out. Looking back, I am so happy that I was able to make Mr. Robertson laugh. And perhaps laughter was the best medicine for him that day. But he was not looking well. He wasn't feeling well, very well either. So I was aware that Mr. Robertson was not in the best of health. And he would always appreciate whenever I inquired, based on his demeanor, if he was feeling unwell. At one point, I adjourned the court to allow him to go see his doctor. But he could not make it back as he was admitted to hospital that day. Still, I was in shock when I learned the sad news of his passing. I join with everyone here in expressing deepest condolences to Mr. Robertson's dear wife, Shirley, and his children, Sandra, Samantha, and Emery Jr., who all meant the world to him. Also to his extended family, members of his legal chambers, his professional colleagues at the bar, and to his many friends and relatives. Scripture tells us that blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. May you find some comfort from the many speeches which will be delivered here today, and from the knowledge that he touched and impacted the lives of many in a positive way. So even as you mourn, you can celebrate his life with honor, respect, and gratitude. May he be given rest in peace with perpetual light upon him shining. That is the message from my sister, Justice Slange. I have a program which tells me that we have several speakers which we are scheduled to hear from today. I should also let you know that we are streaming the court sitting live, and it's an initiative that we are hoping to maintain, especially for the criminal sessions, in the sense that the courtroom should be accessible to the public. But given our present circumstances, that's not always possible. But if we can use the technology to enable transparency so that citizens can see that justice is being done, I think that will be an important step forward. So there's that. We also have several persons who are joining us via Zoom, and we may be hearing from them. But we do have some speakers who are present. And as the first on my list of speakers, I invite the Honorable Dr. Ralph E. Gonzalez, Prime Minister, in his capacity as counsel, to make a few remarks.
I'm obliged, my lord. Ladies, bench, colleagues all, and immediate family and friends. Emery Robertson. The ancient Greek historian Thucydides, in recounting Pericles' funeral oration in his classic The Peloponnesian Wars, made the observation that when someone dies, contestation ceases, and where there was in the past any joinder of conflict or tension, that too comes to an end in our united humanity. I got to know Emery Robertson at the grammar school in 1959. I went there in January 1959. In those days, the exams were in November, British exams, so you went at the start of the year rather than in September. Because nowadays you have the exams in May and June. He was 2 or so years ahead of me in school, and of course chronologically. And he was always, as a schoolboy, someone which you knew immediately of high intelligence and very active in all pursuits. And like most of us, certainly including myself, full of mischief. Indeed, it would have been a sad reflection on him if I were to report that he was not mischievous. So was I. Still am. He successfully passed his senior Cambridge examinations. That's what they used to call the intermediate procedure. Do that kind of exam. You had to, I also had to do that exam. The last year of 1963. You had to be a good all-round student. You had to pass the groups. You had to pass English, you had to pass mathematics. You had to have an art subject, whether it's literature or history. You had to do a science subject. Obviously, as I said, English and mathematics and so on. You had to, in order to get your certificate. That is how it was. I believe Emery also did Latin, which is one of the subjects which I myself had to do. Just to give an indication, just before I had gone to the grammar school, sadly they had dropped Greek, otherwise we would have done Greek also. So Emery had a good basic British public school education inside of a small island state. still in the throes of colonialism. Of course, he did his higher school certificate, which is now what is called CAPE, used to be called GCE. I'm almost sounding as though that I'm from the 19th century. But that is what happened in colonial St. Vincent and Grenadines. Some things bad about it and some things good. I will say, not as good as now. I don't think we were as well educated as the children now. But that is what we went through. And it was in those days, everybody wanted you to either do medicine or law. If even you had never gone to secondary school, and most people didn't, you're a farmer, you're a studio, your son is going on, or daughter going to A levels, well, to sixth form, law or medicine. Other things came afterwards. And his close relative had already been making a name for himself, O'Neil Sylvester, both in law and in politics. And O'Neil, of blessed memory, was involved with the People's Political Party of Ebenezer Joshua. And it was a great rival, Milton Gator of the St. Vincent and the Grenadines Labour Party. And that's where the Robertsons and the Sylvesters were located. PPP. It was not surprising, therefore, that Emery went off to study law, and in fact became involved in politics. And he got involved in politics subsequently with Sir James Mitchell's NDP, because that was opposed to the Labour Party after the demise of Joshua's PPP. It was almost like Joshua transferred his votes to the NDP. So it's almost like a family tribe. I'm not saying that in any pejorative way. I'm just explaining what happened, reality. In the same way that my dear sister, Renee Batiste, family was in the Cato Labour Party tribe. When I got, Emery and I kept in touch in one way or the other. Small country, went away and studied, came back. When I came to practice law, after many twists and turns at the university, my first office, law office, was actually in the very building in which his chambers were. Upstairs of what is now the Housing and Land Development Corporation building, owned at the time by Jack Joking. King's Rental was downstairs, and Flick was downstairs. And Emery taught me many things, and we were in and out of each other's chambers, and we developed a very good friendship. In fact, in those early days, when he had the clients who were lower down the food chain, he would send them to me, because there were problems more to him than anything else. But it's good to learn some things down at the lower end of the food chain, because eventually you get up to the top. There's some, I understand, these days, You don't want to do anything at the lower end of the food chain. You want to start at the top. Well, in different times, different circumstances. Emery, like old-fashioned barristers, mastered evidence and procedure. Civil procedure, criminal procedure, and evidence. And he mastered the common law. So that he was able to accept briefs across a wide spectrum of specialist areas because of his foundation, his strength in the common law and in evidence and procedure. And I formed the impression when I appeared against him that Emery Robertson always wanted to finish a case very early so he can get back to his chambers. So you can expect that he will be taking some technical point early o'clock. However obtuse the point might be, however novel, you can expect that if he had a judge, or indeed magistrate court, someone who is not quite versed in the particular area and easily persuaded by an eloquent barrister, Emery on many occasions was able to walk away with victories. But he was a splendid lawyer, no question about it. Later on in life, I formed the impression later on that he was not so assiduous in keeping himself up to date with statute law. So sometimes he would forget, he would miss this or that. I see one of his daughters smiling because she knows what I'm talking about. I saw him just a few weeks ago. Saw him outside of chambers here. I was going to another place. And I said, comrade, how things going? He says, all right, man, but the back, you know. So I said, what are you doing about the back? He said, well, they tell me I can do something about it, but I free these doctors. That's not his brother. They're free these doctors, they might put some knife and cripple me, so I really walk with the stick and taking the time. They like this with Jesus. I was really surprised when I heard that he had passed away, because other than his back, he appeared to me to be in fine fettle, and of course, full of humor. Emery Robertson, whom tomorrow is going to lie in the Parliament. Number of persons don't remember that Emery was a parliamentarian, although he was never elected to Parliament. Tried a couple of occasions, but not because he is not a good man, but he is against the runner plate. Sometimes he's just against the runner plate, and you just have to accept it. And on one occasion, he went as an independent. In fact, Barnett Campbell QC was listening on Zoom. That's in 1987 by election after the death of Eddie Griffith. He ran as an independent for Central Kingston. Because what had happened, he had come in support of the NDP in 1984, was appointed a senator, became Attorney General. In fact, before the victory in 1984, he had been a senator appointed by then James Mitchell, and sat in the House, had a stint in opposition, and for a short while became Attorney General. In fact, I think, well, his term as Attorney General was not very long. He and Sir James fell out. Doesn't matter which story is correct, you get different stories when people fall out, especially in politics. So in 1987, he saw the opportunity to see if he can put a dent in Sir James's armory in central Kingston. But I think he was fighting more issue of principle, more hope than expectation. And I remember going to his public meetings up in Sharps. Not very many people were around. And he had a very small public address system. You could hardly hear him away from the small public address system. And I remember distinctly, at the time there was a song by Scorcher, fork up the beaches, fork them up. And he had chosen as his symbol, as an independent candidate, the fork. So his main song was fork them up. So Scorcher's song will be played on the scratchy tape recorder coming over this terrible system, amplified system. And then Emery would sing magisterially, I tell you people, we want to fork them up. And I used to tease him about that, and we had a very, very good laugh. I think you'd appreciate this being told about him. He's a good human being. I quite like Emery. I considered him my friend even when we were on different political sides. And that's difficult for some people to do, but that wasn't difficult for Emery himself, because neither of us has anything. Well, he never had a malicious bone in him. And I don't know how to be malicious either. It's impossible. He's a good family man. You know, and he had his children, 3 of them studied law. In fact, I used to say to him, what happened? Are we making the legal profession a family business? And if you notice, until very recently, until the education revolution and the opening of university, where a lot of working class children of the peasantry come into the profession, is a good thing, very good thing. Before then was O'Neill and his daughter, Emery and his 2 daughters and son, Olin Denny's daughter, Douglas Williams' daughter, Arthur Williams' sons, Ralph Montana's son. Like it's a family business, you know, but all that has changed. And in the profession, over the years, Emery would have seen huge changes with a lot of women coming to the bar, and of course, female judges. I remember the first time we had a female judge, Justice Sylvia Bertrand, I think she was. We were in a little bit of we were in a sense, new territory. What should she be called? Or lordship, or ladyship. Ladyship sounds as free off the tongue. In those days, now it's perfectly in order. Emery has been through many things, from colonialism to internal self-government to independence, and served at the highest level. There's a poem which he would have been familiar with, because he read poetry also. It would have been one of his favorites, one of my favorites too, by so-called one of the young poets of the English poets of the early 19th century, John Keats, Ode to a Nightingale. And the story here is that Keats was He wrote these majestic words which I'm about to quote at page 26, 27. He studied medicine and he found that medicine to be uninterested and went to poetry. And he had gone to see his brother just outside of London, who was dying from an incurable disease, tuberculosis at the time. And his brother was there, emaciated, sick, gaunt. The imminence of death was in the air. And he comes out, it was springtime. And the flowers were blooming, the trees were coming back to life, and the birds, including the nightingale, were singing merrily. And peace began. And I can imagine how the family feels. My heart aches, and the drowsy numbness pains my sense, as though of hemlock I had drunk. And then the second verse said, oh, for a beaker full of the warm south. He felt like having a drink of wine from the south of France. Here we would say, let's have a sunset strong. And then he turns to the bird in some of the most majestic words written in the English language. It's about us, it's about life, it's about Emery. It's about our civilization, universal civilization, but our Caribbean civilization, wherever people are, where they're dwelling in peace and harmony. He looks at the bird, Keats, the nightingale, and says to it, fade far away, dissolve and quite forget what thou amongst the leaves had never known, the weariness, the fever, and the fret. Here, where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy shakes a few sad last grey hairs, where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies, where but to think it is full of sorrow and laden eyes despair, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, nor new love pine at them beyond tomorrow. In other words, we must look at our inside. Amidst all our weaknesses and limitations, and look at our strengths and possibilities. And when the beauty can no longer keep the lustrous eyes, nor new love pine at them beyond tomorrow, we remember the person and what he or she represented to those close to them, and what he or she has done. Farewell, my friend Emery. We have had our contestations. Now they are at an end. I hope, like an ancient Viking warrior, to meet you at some appointed time in Valhalla. May he rest in peace, and may light perpetual shine upon him. I'm obliged. My Lord, my David, you may appreciate that, or may not, in fact, for some persons think Prime Ministers have nothing to do. Is it possible for you to be excused? It's amazing, you know. My friend from the other side in the opposition assumed the role of judge and said, no, I may not be. He didn't answer.
Yes, all the my sisters, I'm
obliged, my Lord.
are also persons who are attending this special sitting via Zoom, making use of the technology. Might I ask those persons who are so attending and who are not speaking to please mute their microphones until it is time for them to speak. The next speaker will in fact come to us via that medium. Mr. Parnell Campbell, Queen's Counsel. Okay, Mr. Campbell, you now need to unmute your microphone so we can hear you. Yes, Mr. Campbell, we can see you, but we would like to hear you as well. So your microphone should be adjusted. Maybe you can get some assistance with the technology.
I take it up. I'm on now, hello?
Yes, you are, Mr. Campbell.
Thank you. May it please your Lordship, the ladies, esteemed colleagues at the bar, members of the bereaved family, brothers and sisters. I regret I am not able to be with you at the courthouse now in person, but thanks to modern technology, I am heartened that I could at least make a contribution to these few words of tribute by members of the legal profession in memory of a departed brother, also a member of the profession. I quite enjoyed the Prime Minister's delivery, and I endorsed the parts of it, the political parts, insofar as I was involved. The news of Emery's death came to me as a bit of a shock. We both had in recent years, and particularly months, problems of personal mobility. So that when we went forth in the pre-COVID days upstairs to Korea's building, we would have to sit, whereas our colleagues for the most part would stand around and joke, and invariably, Emery and I sat side by side, being two ancient warriors in the profession, awaiting our turn. And as is the wont of the elderly, we would reminisce. My initial memories of Emery go back to our grammar school days. He had entered the grammar school a year before I did, but I caught up with him in about Form 5, and thereafter we did our O-levels in Form 5 together, went on to lower 6, and then to upper 6. We did the identical subjects for our high school in upper 6. We did our history, geography, economics, English literature, and of course, general paper. Emery was a very bright student, which is not surprising considering his heritage, in that he was one of the sons of legendary primary school teacher, Mr. Emery Robertson, who had been head teacher of several primary schools in various parts of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. and Emery was a fitting member of that ecosystem. And you know, one cannot discount the importance of heritage, because throughout the years I have known Emery Robertson, he manifested all of the qualities which were drummed into us in the olden days. He remained every inch a gentleman throughout. I can't recall hearing him raise his voice in anger, except in the heat of battle on the floor of a courtroom in which he was involved. And as the Prime Minister said, he was indeed a very passionate advocate who has left us a signal case, S.V.G. Robertson, which you will find quoted in practically every textbook dealing with civil procedure, a case that I will speak a little more about in a while. When we wrote our A-level exams in November, December 1962, I distinctly recall, and I checked that recollection with my other classmate that I jacked a few days ago. We had written a paper in the morning, and the examination premises were at the Memorial Hall for A-levels in '62. And as we got back to school for the afternoon paper, there was Emery almost in tears, telling us that President John F. Kennedy had been shot, 22nd November 1960. Because Emery had an uncanny facial resemblance to President J.F. Kennedy. And we teased him about that all the time, and he enjoyed being teased about his resemblance to the great American president. So that Emery told us he had heard on the radio that Kennedy had been shot and killed. And spontaneously, we gave Emery our condolences, knowing what the president meant to him. Emery, we both graduated in that year, and as the Prime Minister said, the school ran from January to December. And when Emery graduated, he landed a very prestigious job at, I think, Barclays Bank, which made us all very proud for him. A few years later, he went off to London to do law and returned in 1970 and was called to the bar in St. Vincent and Grenadines in August 1970. Had he lived a few more days, he would have chalked up 50 years as a member of the bar. When he returned as a lawyer, I recall going to see him the very next morning after he had been called in his chambers for some legal advice, which he dutifully and willingly gave to me. I can't recall honestly if he ever asked me for any money or indeed if I volunteered to pay him for those services. But we remain friends ever since. Ironically, in October of that very year, 1970, it was my turn I pause the pen when the pen is still audible.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Thank you a lot. In October 1970, the year that Emery was called to the bar, I joined the law faculty at Cave Hill and began my legal career. Went to England after that and returned in 1979. But Emery and I had a political connection in the year 1972, in that he was a candidate in the general elections of 1972, fighting the West Kingston constituency on behalf of the People's Political Party. My group, we were a quasi-political group, linked up with the PPP to give them critical electoral support, and I campaigned with Emery in West Kingston in the 1972 elections. He lost, promptly filed an election petition. Don't know what became of that, but certainly nothing resulted from that petition. But Emery filed his petition, as did Mr. Fatima Adams, who had lost in East Kingston quarter into that. I then went back to Cave Hill because I was going back and forth between Cave Hill and St. Vincent, but I kept in touch with them. When eventually I settled down in St. Vincent and the Grenadines to practice law, at the end of 1979, beginning of 1980, I received tremendous assistance from Emery. Emery had been a seasoned member of the bar at that time and was always very generous with his assistance and advice. He practiced with his uncle, Mr. Othniel Sylvester. Unfortunately, they had a fire in their chambers in 1983, burned both chambers totally, and he had to relocate and start it all over again, and we took it very spiteful. And we followed the biblical injunction of replenishing not the earth necessarily, but he certainly appeared to have a mission to replenish the land. Because, as you heard from the learned PM, 3 of Emery's 4 children were called to the bar. First Sandra, then Samantha, and then Emery Winston Jr. Of Samantha, or Sandra, sorry, I can speak because when I served as Attorney General for a little more than a year, Sandra served with me as Crown Counsel in the Ministry of Legal Affairs. And I want to thank Sandra for the service she gave. Every now and then, Emery would meet me and inquire about how his daughter was doing, and I was always happy to give him a positive report, because all of the Robertson's children took on the mannerisms of their father. Polite, respectful, dependable colleagues of the bar, friendly with all, enemy of none. They inherited from their father the smiling countenance, because Emery was, because of the roundness of his features, appeared to have been always smiling, a perpetual smile. And Emery's children have certainly mirrored that characteristic. Beloved ladies, I have written a fairly lengthy article which was published in the Searchlight newspaper Friday before last. And I would commend it to those who are interested in hearing the rest of the narrative. But conscious of the passage of time, I would truncate these remarks by not repeating essentially what had already been said by me in that article. Suffice it to say that in Emery Robertson, the bar had a stalwart and worthy member. And I dare say he would have been next in line for appointment as Queen's Counsel had the rules not been changed. Some time ago, we got a circular setting out new rules for the appointment of barristers, of attorneys as Queen's Counsel. I recall discussing them with Emery and asking him if he didn't intend to apply it, because he really ought to have applied. Emery said he took objection in principle to the new dispensation where one had to apply for elevation and pay a fairly hefty fee for that application, because he believed in the traditional method whereby one was merely recommended by one's peers and by the judges, and one received elevation by dint of that recollection. And he, on principle, didn't feel that he ought to, as he regarded it, as demean himself, to apply and say, I want to be appointed Queen's Counsel, and all that followed. So he said he had no intention of applying, and so he did not. Had he applied, he would have been a vigorous and vibrant member of the inner bar. Notwithstanding that Emery's knowledge of the law was now legendary. I joined the Prime Minister in saying that Emery took points of law which were not thought about by his opponents. Some, let us be frank, of doubtful merit, but they were taken nonetheless, because Emery left no stone unturned in his quest for justice as he saw it for his clients. He would be missed, and I would like to send my condolences on those of my family to his widow, Dr. Robertson, his children, his siblings, and all his other relatives and friends. We have lost a good soul in Emery Robertson. May he rest in peace. I thank you, Lord, ladies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have to move with a little bit of a dispatch, so I'm going to move right along to the next speaker. On my list, I have Mr. René Batiste.
May it please you, my lord, the ladies, well, colleagues. The shocking news came on the 13th of August, 2020, when our senior, Emery Robertson, passed away. It was for me totally unexpected. He was not ailing, so to speak. He had had what we call a domestic incident, to term it, and was supposed to be on the mend. He used to say to me that his only real fear he had was being unable to walk if he underwent the surgery recommended for his back. He said he didn't think he liked the odds, 50-50. Our dear senior Emery, as most his contemporaries would call him, was viewed as a very suave, sophisticated, easygoing individual, and a gentleman at all times. But he was also a very stubborn individual. He would hate to abandon a course of action that he had adopted. He would find some poetic way of indicating why he was right in any event. I knew him through one of my relatives way back in the 60s as a little sprout. I seem to recall him working at Barclays Bank, for those who may not have been around those days. And he was on his return when he ran for that seat in West Kingston. Seemed to be very elusive, except for me, that he lost. And he was adamant that the winning candidate, Hudson Tannis, also blessed memory and a member of the bar, should be prosecuted for having a party symbol painted on the street much too close to the polling stations. He was known in those political circles as loving to bring election petitions, even if they were abandoned, as you would have heard from the Honorable Prime Minister. Despite these electoral battles, we love to chat from time to time about politics. And he would warn me about the infamous path that many had there to tread. His practice was such that for those of us who came to the bar after the 1970s and the 80s, we would sit right across there and look at him. That's how we learned back in the day. How do you conduct yourself in court? And how do you conduct a trial? I used to love to see him and Cummings' blessed memory and Mr. Otney Sylvester QC at the bar table. It was such a treat. He was on occasion quite theatrical by the intonations in his voice and his deliberate pronunciations of the words of the English language. He made it seem to be so romantic, and for young practitioners thought, oh, this is what we would love to be. He also loved the idea of going to the Privy Council. Samantha had promised me the list of the cases. We will get them at some time. I think this was a specialty. We all threatened, I'll seek leave to go to the Privy Council. When he was appointed Attorney General in 1984, that was the expected course at the time in his political career. However, when he was about to resign, as a young sprout, he called me and said, I've come over by you. And he said, you know, I'm going to resign, but he never said why. And so we all said, it must be viewed in line with what this is in keeping with the way Emery would handle those circumstances. Later on, we encountered each other in a few matters, and it would surprise some to know that what is being promoted now as part of the rules, mediation. And it was a joy for me as a sprout to have Mr. Robertson sitting in my chambers upstairs of a building that now houses the t-shirt shop, sitting with his client, and we are working out the terms of settlement. Our senior was respected by the bench and the bar. He was a disciplined professional. It was no surprise that his offspring chose to read law as well, even if Emery Jr. eventually took to the bluer skies. He has left an inheritance, a legacy for generations to come, and to follow the lead that he has set. He has always insisted on thorough research. He believed in sound arguments. Even though he was stubborn and firm in his view, he lacked arrogance. He was always a gentleman lawyer, not at all puffed up by his qualifications or the length of time that he was at this bar. 50 years is a golden milestone. And just about 3 short years ago, members of the bar opted not to wait for the golden anniversary. Luckily we did. We honored him, Mr. Carlyle Duggan QC and Mr. Arthur Williams. Now only Brother Carlyle remains of that trio, all who also served as Attorney General in our country. We would miss his elegant grey hair, nodding, his soft presence, his willingness to share and engage young counsel. We would miss him. Sam, Sandra, Jr., other relatives and friends, please accept our sincerest condolences and also pass on our sentiments to his dear wife, whom for me, I can never forget that afternoon in the drawing room of your living at your home when Dr. Robertson pinned me as a seroptomist over 30 years ago. Be assured that we'll always remember the esteem with which we've held him. Be assured that at some time, if it will be possible, that we start to adopt awards at our bar for young ones, either to study or in recognition of outstanding work, that the time has now come for us to lay down markers as a reminder of the esteem and scholarship that they have exhibited here at the bar, so that it will continue in perpetuity. Much obliged, Mike.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is also Mrs. Eva.
Thank you, my Lord. My Lord, my Ladyships, fellow colleagues at the bar, friends and family of the Robertson family. Permit me before I begin, my lords, to express regret for the honorable leader of the opposition, Dr. Friday, for not being here today. His dear father passed away yesterday after having lost his mother just a few months ago. So I apologize on his behalf. Let me say what Emery would like to say. Think of me as one at risk. For me, you should not be. I have no pain, no troubled thoughts, for I am just asleep. Emery Winston Robinson, a lawyer, statesman, politician, husband, father, friend. I cannot recall when I first met Emery. I knew his brother Morris very well, though we were contemporaries in school together. I searched my memory to see if I can recall when we first met all those years ago, but it was after I was called to the bar. And I always remember Emery's warmth, willingness to share, his wit and humor. But the word that stands out most in my mind that describes Emery Winston Robinson is graciousness. He was a very gracious, soft-spoken gentleman. I too cannot recall Emery raising his voice even when he's passionate. He always found a way to express himself without shouting. And he served his country well. As a senator and a member of parliament, this parliament, from 1984 to 1986, and also as this country's Attorney General for the same period, dedicating himself to a period of service to the people of St. Vincent and Grenadines. As a successful barrister, he did not have to do this, but he chose to enter into politics because he wanted to serve his people. But what I remember most of Emery as a barrister is his ability to engage the court. I remember sitting in this very court of appeal session, and Emery had a particular appeal, and very early into his presentation, all three judges told Emery that the point he was making, that he should pass on to the point. 1.5 hours later, all sitting here, listening to Emery engage the court on a point that they had already made up their mind on, and being able to keep them engaged. All of us sitting here thought, how can anyone articulate like that? What advocacy? I have never seen another lawyer who has been able to engage the court, especially. My little friend was there, and when the court said, "We are not with you," Emery was able to keep them engaged for almost 2 hours. I also recall coming to chambers many, many mornings. The only lawyers would gather, and the first thing would say, "What's inside the judge?" And when we heard it was Emery, they'd say, "Well, don't worry, it's just an adjournment, or it's a consent order." And half an hour we'd be still waiting, because Emery was very thorough, even in seeking an adjournment. But as I said, we'll always remember his wit and his scholarship and his ability and willingness to help at all times, other colleagues at the bar. What I want to commend Emery especially for is his belief in family, true family values. I think we can all learn from him how he cherished his family. The way he formed a business. They all worked in the same building, including his wife and his children, as lawyers in the family business, in the profession. And it is his love and belief in family, I think, that encouraged 3 of his children. And I think that he has 3 children. Maybe I got 4. Anyway, to love and to follow in his footsteps. A tribute to the kind of man he was. I do not intend to be very long. As has been said before me, Emery lived a full life with his charm and his wit and his passion. A patriotic Vincentian has left a legacy for this country. I want to say to you a poem that I found by David Hawkins. You can shed tears that he's gone, or you can smile that he lived. You can close your eyes and pray that he will come back, or you can open your eyes and see all that he has left. Your heart can be empty because you cannot see him, or you can be full of the love that you shared. You can turn your back on tomorrow and live yesterday, or you can be happy for tomorrow because of yesterday. You can remember him and only that he's gone, or you can cherish his memories and let it live on. You can cry and close your mind, be empty and turn your back, or you can do what he would want you to do. Smile, open your eyes, love, and go on. May he rest in peace.
And on behalf of Sisters at the Bar, please convey our condolences to Dr. Friday because of his recent loss. The next speaker, Mr. Dwayne Daniel.
By your leave, my lord, my ladies. My lords, I'm not usually at a lost for words, but these occasions are so solemn, and for fear that I would not be able to speak given the profundity of the occasion, I did put a few words to paper. Some of my material has been stolen by Miss Batiste, but be that as it may. Mrs. Batiste, sorry. I must first issue a disclaimer in respect of my suitability for proceedings of this nature, as I am not sure that my personality and voice are perfectly aligned with the solemnity of this somber occasion. My familiarity with Emery Robertson Sr. stems from my relationship with his children, Sandra, Samantha, and Junie. I flat shared with two of his children and godfather to one of his grandchildren. Emery Robertson Sr. moved my call to the bar. I had a personal friendship and relationship with him, though speaking on the occasion of his death is not a task I relish, for the aforementioned reasons and more. It would be remiss of me not to speak if called upon to do so as a friend of the family. Nevertheless, all things considered, I will be brief. I need say, my lords, my lord and ladies, that being brief at the special sitting of my late senior is meant as no disrespect to his legacy. For we all know that though my fallen senior and brother-in-the-law was a man of many gifts and talents, brevity was not one of them. In fact, he had a reputation, at least in the practitioners of my generation, for the ability to speak at great length. He had the power to dash against jagged rocks the hopeful expectation of junior counsel getting back to chambers early. When Emery showed up, you were sensible to call the office to notify them that all afternoon appointments were to be rejected. Experience would teach that this is so, even though he sweetly smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'm just here for a drink." I shall be ever grateful to him for allowing me, when I have returned from my academic training, to work on some of his files to get hands-on and practical experience. And I'm also grateful to him for bestowing on me a love for the practice of land law, one of my favorite areas of practice now, though I was not a big fan of land law at the academic stage. I am even more grateful to him for, on one Saturday evening, while working on some submissions in his office, for encouraging me to stay in St. Vincent rather than returning to England or returning to New York, where I was to take my New York bar exam, and for offering to move my call. Samantha also gets some credit for that decision to remain in St. Vincent, because Carnival was coming up, and she very wisely said, if I got called, there were a lot of bail applications piled up over the long Carnival weekend to do, and the money from that could go towards buying drinks. I wish this were a more inspirational story, but it is what it is. And now for some levity. His tenacity for holding on to a point was religion. I remember he once held the Court of Appeal to ransom for almost 2 full days. Shortly thereafter, and perhaps by no coincidence, the Chief Justice issued guidelines and directions on the length of written submissions and counsel's appearance before the Court of Appeal. Our local bar jokingly referred to it as the Emery direction. I got the distinct impression he was truly old school. He wrote his submissions longhand, then would task trusty Mrs. Douglas, his secretary, to type. Once, when discussing a matter we were on opposite sides a week before an upcoming trial, I asked him where were his witness statements and consequences that appear in the CPR rule. His response was, "You see what it says in the beginning of those rules? You must do what is in the interest of justice. It is in the interest of justice that the people are to be heard." I'm doing the witness statements right now. He made a last-minute application for extension of time on the day of trial, an oral application, might I add. Wore both the judicial officer and me down, got away with it, and then said, see, justice demands this thing. I could regale you with more stories, like the time we came to receive a judgment and he brought his whole file, and proceeded at that point to launch into oral submissions as the judge tried to give for a decision. This was the manner of the man, always affable and always with a smile with his dimples at the end. If on Judgment Day we are called upon to make representations as to whether we are to gain entry into the kingdom of heaven, given Emery Robertson Sr.'s propensity for lengthy submissions before Lords, I think I now understand why the afterlife is measured as in third. He was a pleasant and kind man, easy to talk to. His children and I were once given to meeting for libations downstairs his house every Tuesday night. I'm sure that would bring a smile to Sandra's face. Once, in what must have been in the wee hours of Wednesday morning, he came down apparently to tell us that we were all far too old to be that noisy. He ended up staying and had a drink until Mrs. Robertson, affectionately called Mother, came down to retrieve the effector. His humor, his off-brand personality, his passion for his work, his love for his family and children, he will be missed. To Mother, his family and friends, I say this. Shed your tears in grief and in his memory. And I will leave you with the words of Washington Irving. There's a sacredness in tears. They are not a mark of weakness, but of power. They speak more eloquently than 10,000 tongues. They are the messengers of overwhelming grief, of deep contrition and unspeakable love. Emery Robertson Sr., we bid you adieu, Godspeed, and may you rest in peace.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daniel. The next speaker is Annette Frederick.
Please, you allow ladies, colleagues at bar table, colleagues in court, Sandra, Junior, other members of the family. I rise today to pay tribute to Emery Robertson, known to me as Uncle Emery, who and my father, who is not able to be present today, is not well, but he and my father were friends forever. I have known Uncle Emery Sr. for my entire life. He would often tease me that he remembers when on cue, my brother JD and I would sing a Christmas song, regardless of what time of the year it was. This was our tune that we sang as toddlers, a duet. And he says, you don't remember vividly. I remember that I have known you with your father since you were in diapers. So while I grieve for the senior counsel and the father figure, I know that my father grieves the loss of a real friend and a genuine friend. And so I wish to say a few words, really, not just on behalf of Frederick's attorneys, the staff, but on behalf of my own father, whose tribute will come tomorrow. Samantha Robertson was the first lawyer who ever helped me when I became a practitioner. I had to do a capious warrant, and I had no idea what that was or what it involved. And Samantha cursed me through it while teaching me. Everything was a rebuke. Then you're supposed to call the police. Go and get, where the man, he's on a plane, get him off the plane. You can't do this. And I asked my father why she was so angry with me. And he said, no, she's correct and she's teaching you and she's right. And she has every right to be angry with you because she's your senior. And you see Emery and Samantha, learn. They are your family at the back. And so I took my rebuke, was successful with the capious warrant, and I never forgot that she called me back after to find out if I got through. She called me throughout the day to make sure that I learned what to do. And really, 17 years ago, we became connected through that first act as a senior lawyer, assisting me. And I became connected with Robertson's Chambers as a consequence of, and as a consequence of the connection between our fathers. Samantha and I would always tease each other that Emery had a soft spot for me, but she didn't mind that because Baylis had a soft spot for her. And I recall one time she had my father's picture as her screensaver on her phone. And I said, did you get my permission to use my father's picture as a screensaver, ma'am? And she said, go and take a picture of my father and use it as your screensaver, please, because I'm not changing this one. So we teased each other at length because we were connected, our fathers were connected, and our chambers were connected through genuine friendship that spanned longer than my lifespan and hers between our parents. Who was Emery Robertson, the senior, the practitioner, the mentor, the father figure? He was always ready to guide. If you called him, much to the displeasure of his clients, he would take your call as a practitioner, schedule a time when he could hear you on whatever issue was important to you. Sometimes I would turn up unannounced and he would ask his clients to step out so that he could entertain me with whatever issue concerned me at the time. And Miss Douglas would, her eyebrows would raise and she would smile, and after 2 or 3 hours of being in his company, she would tease me and say, Miss Frederick, well, we will reschedule the client. Because he was always willing to give his time to other counsels, and especially those of us who were learning as we went, learning in practice. He was always willing to rebuke you, though gently. You never felt scorched by anything that he had to say, which was intended to correct you for some failing on your part. Always he had the ability to respect you as a young practitioner. And he always underscored the need for research. We would speak at length about the books in his library where there was information and the fact that you could access those books, but you could never take them out. And I remember once he loaned me a text that was somewhat worse for wear. And I took it and had it rebound. And I delivered it back to him in person. And I said, Senior, my goal is always to give your books back to you in your hand, so that you can't say the last thing I know is check Vinette for the text. And he appreciated it so much. That was the man. You felt appreciated. Your actions never went unnoticed. Always had good advice, even for our clerks at Frederick's Attorneys. They noted to me that they last spoke with him on the 29th of May, and that we last saw each other on the 16th of July. Every time Samantha and I would communicate and he wasn't doing well, I would call him after a conversation with him. And part of why I am so broken-hearted about the last time we interacted, it was the day before he passed away. And Samantha and I were just in a casual chat about the fact that he wasn't well and she couldn't come to court to defend me with a traffic ticket that I was going to fight. So she wanted me to get an adjournment because yes, we're going to fight this traffic ticket. And she had something to do for her father. So he wasn't, he wasn't well and hadn't been well. And she was going to see him in the afternoon and she was going to not be able to help. And normally, I would call him immediately and say, Senior, what's happening? And something in me just said, you know what, if he's not well, don't call me because he mightn't be able to indulge you and your conversation. And part of what hurts so much is that I didn't get to have that conversation with him, which I normally would have done for the entire last year, that he wasn't well. My brother is a medical doctor, and so on the occasion when he would complain of his back or his legs or something, I would call my brother. On the last occasion that my brother was here, we paid him a visit, got x-rays, and my father complained that we were trying to take him over, trying to intervene with him, trying to convince him about surgery and not to have, the fares that he did. But that's what you do with family. And as far as we are concerned, the Robertsons are our family. Samantha is like a sister. And Emery was that father figure that I could call on even when I was not seeing eye to eye with my own senior. And it's funny that the comment was made about practitioners whose children are in practice. Yes, there is a special relationship between a practitioner who has as his colleague in practice his child. And so the understanding of what that dynamic was something that joined myself and Samantha together. So that when she wanted to complain about senior not hearing and not understanding and not listening, she would call me. And when I wanted to complain about my senior not understanding and not hearing and not listening, I would call her. As a matter of fact, every argument between myself and my own senior, Emery Robertson would mediate. Every argument. he was my go-to person when I felt dissatisfied with my own father as a practitioner. And one of the last conversations we had, where for some reason he felt he needed to get a message to Samantha through me. That's how it worked. If he felt that she needed to do something differently or better, he would call me and say, Vinette, your friend, I want you to talk to her for me, because she ain't hearing me on this point, but this is the reason for me saying X, Y. And then at whatever hour, I would call Samantha and say, what happened? And we would have that mediation. So that's how it worked. And one of the last times I was called to mediate, he started the conversation by saying, I love Samantha very much. I love that daughter very much. And I felt it. I knew it. I could see it in the interaction. And my heart breaks because I am not ready for him to be gone. And none of us is ever ready. On the 23rd of January 2019, my family lost our mother. And who was present, please, regardless of his illness, of his own trouble with his mobility, was Emery Robertson. Lying on a bed next to my father, eating and drinking things they should not have been eating and drinking, and just talking for hours. He was there during our time of grief to hold up B-Man, B-Boy, his friend, Bills. And so, Samantha, you and your family, you are not alone. The Frederick family, Frederick's attorneys, and the Frederick family, we are forever connected. Emery Sr., I once asked you how you wanted to be remembered. And you said, as a practitioner who cared for people and who wanted to see that the law was practiced to bring justice to the common man. Senior, you have lived such a life. You are loved, you are remembered for your strength, quiet, resilience, for your support to other junior practitioners, and for being someone who understood what justice meant to the common man. May your soul rest in peace. How much of that?
Thank you very much, Mr. Frederick. And again, on behalf of the court, please convey the greetings of the court to your father, Mr. J.H. Frederick. The next speaker, Ms. Nadia Eustace.
May it please you, my lord, my ladies, all peace. Quite significantly today, family, a brother, part of color. I'm not here to let this. Now, being the run to be literally last to speak has its perks and its pitfalls. The obvious pitfall is a shameless pilfering by people like my good friend Wayne of some of the stories I hope to rely upon today in explaining the lawyer that my senior was, Emery Robertson. And those stories tell so much about the caliber of the man and the caliber of the lawyer. I won't repeat them. But one of the perks of being the last is that I have the benefit of distillation of some of the things said today. Some of those are about Emery's principle and also about service. And so I will refine my comments to those two aspects of my senior counsel, who without disrespect, I seek leave to refer to simply as Emery. Because Emery was an eminently approachable senior counsel. As a young attorney, as a very junior attorney at the bar, I never feared being able to speak to him and discuss a matter and show my ignorance in order to benefit from his counsel. It was always wise, and it was always based on his vast knowledge of the law, a knowledge that many here have referred to as legendary, a knowledge which was so wide that one could easily understand his difficulty in resisting the temptation to rely on sometimes obscure points, because he could see the connection between so many different elements of law. He dealt with it almost like one would a Rubik's Cube. He would just twist it and turn it and look at all of the possible permutations in coming to the bar and advocating on a particular point. He enjoyed dialectical tension. Another lawyer who rivals Emery's enjoyment of that dialectical tension would be King's Counsel Stanley John. And the two men, neither of the men is blessed with brevity as a result. And I say that with the greatest of respect. I got to know Emery before meeting and falling hopelessly in love with his daughter Samantha. Because my senior at the time, Agnes Cato, would go to Emery Robertson as a lawyer's lawyer. And so I got accustomed to sitting in his chambers with her, and with Sharon Cummings as well, who would treat Emery as the lawyer's lawyer. Because when confronted with a matter that seemed to permit there was no opening, no lacuna that anybody could figure out how to exploit in a particular matter, Emery was the one that they would go to as a rainmaker. He could find that way. And he did so very often by dogged persistence, absolutely dogged persistence. He was so dogged that it was difficult to reconcile the soft-spoken, mild-mannered man with the one who simply would not take a cue or a hint from the bench when they said, "We'll hear you on your next point." Yes, Dwayne said they would often say, "I'm not with you." And sometimes that dogged persistence would bring them entirely around to Emery's position. And many benefited from that. Now, Emery comes from a generation that I realize today touches a few of us. Mandela, Junior, Sandra, Samantha, and I are all the children of men who sat in a particular sixth form. So Mr. Campbell, Mr. Robertson, and my father, they're all in that sixth form together. And they share a characteristic, which is service to the point of their own personal detriment. I saw Emery's health start to wane, and I attributed it then, as I do now, to his commitment to everyone else's needs. It was not unusual to go into his chambers and find Emery sitting with a client the entire day. One client, the whole day. And I got to know some of these clients. I expected to see them always in his office because he was that accessible. And he wouldn't eat lunch. You know, Samantha would be behind him to eat something. He'd have no time for it. He'd maybe have coffee. That wears on you after a while. It wears on all of our fathers. Mandela and I were speaking about that recently as well. they leave nothing for themselves when the day is done. They leave nothing of themselves to enjoy after they've given service. And I admire it, but at the same time, I don't want to see you do that, Savannah. Or Junebug, or Sandra, Mandela, none of us. As much as I want to see us serve our fellow woman and man, I want to see us have something left of ourselves also. Now, that commitment to service is a badge of honor, but it makes it somewhat difficult when we mourn these people because you almost want to feel angry at them for not having kept something of themselves. Well, let's go back to Emery and principle, because that's where I feel happiest and how I'm able to accept that he won't be here, that I won't see that shock of gray hair, I won't see the twinkle in his eye when I ask him about a particular matter and he's figured out some way to deal with it. He loved the principle of the thing. He didn't pursue it just because he wanted to stand on his feet for hours and battle the Court of Appeal or drive a good judge crazy. He did it because he was enamored of the principle of the thing. He enjoyed the dialectical tension that law, unlike so many other fields of endeavor, fuels and offers us so freely. He lived in that dialectical tension, and he relished it. He absolutely relished it. Law, more than any other profession, suited Emery's mind. In his last days, Emery didn't sleep much. Something was occupying him. And make no bones about it, as death draws near, life and death, there always exists dialectical tension. There's always advocacy to be done, and we always have to reflect on our own lives. And I think that's what Emery was doing in the last nights. What robbed him of sleep? He was engaged in some form of advocacy on his own life. And typical of Emery, he would not go quietly into that good night. Many here today have waxed poetic, so allow me to do it. And I'll call upon Dylan Thomas, of course, who, like Etta James and at last, has become absolutely obligatory. Just as Etta James is to weddings, Dylan Thomas is now to funerals. But Emery did not go gently into that good night. He raged against the dying of the light. The dying of the light was imminent, but there was advocacy to be done. There was attention to explore. There were points to be made. We all do it, and we will all have to do it at the end of the day, during the dying of the light. And Emery did it doggedly, and I'm certain that his submissions were stellar. So forgive me to be shady. But I think he made a really good case. And I will miss him. I think the bar will be different without Emery. Certainly we juniors will get through case management and other things much more quickly. But it won't be as much fun. I will miss the Rainmaker. Emery was a hell of an attorney. And I am grateful that I had the benefit of him, that we lent him to us for as long as we did. Juma, your father imposed so much bring your granddaughters. Shiloh and Jada, there should be no doubt in your minds about where you're sitting in this life. And there should be no doubt in your minds as his children where you stand. Thank you. I have nothing for my own life.
Thank you very much, sisters. I don't have any other speakers scheduled, and I was asked to do what I could to keep these proceedings to within 1 hour. No proceedings involving Emery Robertson never be kept within those timelines.
Even then.
So again, to his family, from the bench of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, our sincerest condolences. We will take the adjournment at this stage.
Supreme Court in its special sitting now stand to John Sanger.
Thank you.